So in this video, I'll be talking about innateness. Now, if we kind of just analyze the word a little bit, that will probably help because innateness, no, nate like neonato, nato al nacer. So al nacer, innateness. So it's something you have from when you are a child. Okay, from when you are born, more technically. Okay, so why can every normal human being talk? Now, obviously, there are some exceptional cases, deafness, dumbness, but 99.99999% of people can talk. But not everybody in the world can play the piano. Only some people can, and usually they have to take lessons or dedicate lots of hours of kind of dedicated study to be able to play the piano. What about riding a bicycle? When you learn to ride a bicycle, usually one of your parents will take you out, or both, and they will actively teach you how to ride a bicycle. When you learn to drive a car, again, you need somebody to teach you, or you need to experiment on your own for hours and hours and hours before you can actually do it. But what about play or learning to talk, learning? We don't really teach children or babies to play. We don't give them playing lessons. But you can have, cycling lessons, you can have piano lessons, you can have driving lessons, but you don't really have playing lessons. Now, when you're a child, you don't really have language lessons. I don't teach my kids, how to use the present perfect. I don't teach my kids how to, to memorize vocab lists. But at some point in their education, they will learn to write. But again, they will learn to write through formal instruction. These things usually require formal instruction, but using language doesn't really require formal instruction. Playing, we don't really teach kids how to play. So it could be the case that language and playing are perhaps in a different category of learning. The thing is, we take languages for granted, or we take language, our ability to speak, for granted, like lo damos por hecho. No? Because it's so normal, because it's around us all the time, we don't think it's special. We don't think, oh, language is an amazing thing, because we just think, oh, well, we use it all the time. So what? Who cares, right? I mean, like, when, for example, I communicate with my family on the phone who are in England. My grandparents think, oh, it's amazing that they can, communicate across such large distances, and they can have a normal conversation on the phone. It's amazing. I mean, but most younger people wouldn't think that's amazing. We would just think, oh, well, it's just normal, right? We do it all the time. And because we do it all the time, we kind of lose perspective of the fact of how amazing it is. And the same thing happens with language. I've got a quote from Noam Chomsky. It says, "We lose sight of the need for explanation when phenomena are too familiar and obvious." Like language is obvious, ¿no? Pensamos que no es necesario explicar algo cuando es muy familiar, muy obvio, ¿no? We tend too easily to assume that explanations must be transparent and close to the surface. Es una explicación muy sencilla, muy transparente, muy superficial. As native speakers, I'm a native speaker of English, you're native speakers of Spanish, other people are native speakers of Mandarin, other people are native speakers of Italian, whatever. We are all native speakers of something, at least one language. We have a vast amount of data available to us. For just this reason, it is easy to fall into the trap of believing there is nothing to be explained. O sea, pues así hablamos todos, pues ¿qué tiene, no? ¿Qué tiene de especial? Nothing could be further from the truth. No? There's lots to explain. And just because it's not difficult for us to use language, that doesn't mean that language isn't an amazing thing. Okay. So let's talk about learning the language of your environment. Now, obviously, if you take two identical twins, like my daughters, for example, and you separate them at birth, and one goes to live with an English-speaking family and another one goes to live with a Spanish-speaking family, they will each learn English and Spanish, respectively. Just like kids in Spain learn Spanish, children in Hong Kong learn Cantonese. But do dogs learn to bark, and do dogs learn to give you their paw? And I would say that here we kind of have two different types of learning. If any of you have ever had a dog, you know that this action kind of requires you to train the dog to do it. But the dog will bark um, even if the dog has never heard another dog barking. And nobody trains dogs to bark, but you train dogs to give you your paw. So maybe it's time to start thinking about, is language natural to humans? I mean, do we learn to speak language because language is part of us? And one thing to consider there is that no language in all of human history has used sign language, yeah, as the primary way to communicate. Um, sign language is absolutely necessary for people who are deaf or hard of hearing or something like that. And of course, they're perfectly valid languages. But no language or no community, no society in the course of human history has ever used sign language as their primary means of communication. But so does that not say that there's something kind of special, inherent, maybe innate about the way we use language? If every single society uses the vocal apparatus, your mouth and your lungs to produce language, maybe that does kind of indicate that language might be something special. Okay, let's move on. Is learning a language like learning to ride a bike? I'd like you to kind of think about that question. I mean, for learning to ride a bike, you need to take classes, or your mum, your dad teaches you. What about, is language like when a dog barks or when a puppy barks? For example, there are puppies who have never heard barks. They've never heard, "Wow, wow, wow," but they do it. Yeah. So you could probably say that language in the way that dog barks is an instinct. Yeah. If you know the meaning of the word instinct, you'll know that it's something you don't need to teach an animal or a human. It's something they have from the moment they're born. So maybe language is also an instinct. And in fact, Steven Pinker has a book called The Language Instinct. Okay, and in that book, he argues that language is just like when, for example, a caterpillar, when it becomes a butterfly, nobody teaches the caterpillar to wrap itself in a cocoon after a certain number of days. Caterpillars just do that. They just know it's part of them. Yeah. But riding a bike, we don't just know how to do that. We don't just get on the bike and we can suddenly ride it. No, we have to fall off a few times, and then usually our dad tells us, no, do it like this, and etc. etc. What about when a pig grunts? Is that just like language? Is the pig grunting in or does anybody have to teach the pig to grunt? Uh-huh. Probably not, but the pig can do it from the very beginning, right? Okay. Now, that's where we get into this important distinction between learning and acquisition. When you learn a language, you learn vocabulary lists, you learn tenses, you learn the future, the present, the past, all that stuff that you do when you're learning a second language. But babies don't do that. Babies don't learn their first language. They acquire. Yeah. And that is what I want to express here, is that there is a very clear difference between learning a language and acquiring a language. You know, they're two completely different processes. Yeah. If you think about the way you learned your native language, probably Spanish, and now the way you're learning English, they're completely different things. Yeah. And they're completely different processes. And in linguistics, one of the most important areas of linguistics is something we call language acquisition. And in the field of language acquisition, you study the process of when a baby acquires his or her first language. Okay. Well, as always, guys, I hope this information was useful.